This is the Contrib First Talk, and I'm Andrew Riley. I'm the Director of Drupal Development at MediaCurrent. I use this picture everywhere. It was taken at SeaWorld. That's why there are taxis behind me. And at the end of this presentation, there will be a link, so you can immediately go to it and use it for whatever you want. I do have a recorded version of it, but it's slightly different, so I would recommend going to the link I have at the end of this, since it's a little more up to date. So what is Contrib First? We all talk about Drupal Contrib modules, and we create modules, but what really is Contrib First? So it's kind of a shift in mindset. It's more of creating a generic module that multiple people can use, rather than creating something so specific for your client that only your client will be able to use it on one website. Now, what it isn't is kind of what we all do today, even I do this, is creating a module and be like, you know what, this is going to be an awesome module. When I launch this site, I'm putting it on Drupal.org. I just have to make a couple changes, write up some documentation, I can put it on Drupal.org. The reality is, nobody actually does that.
Nobody does it, or is that not a good idea?
It's perfectly a fine idea, but the reality of the situation is I've created personally over 50 modules. I have 4 on Drupal.org. Yeah, and some of them actually, of those 4, were using the Contrib First mindset. It's really not that difficult to create the module as a Contrib First and then use it for your client. Because in our day-to-day activity, who has time to go in and spend about 20% of the time that you use to create the module to go in and update it and then put it on Drupal.org after the fact? We're already moving on to the next client, next project, next whatever fire happens to be going on that day. And I'm using my phone because it has my notes on it. I've never used Google Docs for a presentation, so I can't see my notes on the screen. So why do you want to do Contrib First? It sounds like it's some extra work, and is it really going to help you? So the community benefits by getting another module that can be used by other users. The other day, one of my developers created a new module. He said, should I put it on Drupal.org? I said, you know what, it's not really going to take you that much time to put it on Drupal.org, and if one other person uses it for their site, I consider that, you know, time well spent. And it's kind of interesting. I've created some little, let's just say, modules that don't do much. They just do one little thing. I figured no one's going to use this. I put it up there, and I look a month later, and it's got 400 active sites using it. And you can't really tell how people are going to receive your module. So I say, you know what, if you can, put it up on Drupal.org, because the odds are at least one person out there is going to find it useful and really enjoy it. And it's really bizarre when you go to Drupal camps and people are like, hey, you know that module you created? I love it. It saved my day once. I found it really odd the first time that happened. So the community definitely benefits when you post a module, even if only one other person downloads it. Now, for your company, it's good because, you know what, you're getting your name out there. How many times have you downloaded a module that was done by Lullabot or some other big dev shop out there? You know, they put their little note on there and you're like, hey, it's a Lullabot module, this is great. What's stopping you from doing that, either for your personal brand or for your company? It helps get your name out there. It's always nice when you're going into a sales meeting to say, you know what, we're going to be using this module on your site. I happen to be the author of it. It's been used on over 2,000 sites. That's great for sales. It's also good for you. It's just like in the sales meeting, it's really nice to go into an interview or something like that and be like, you know what, these are the modules I've created. They're used by 5,000 sites. Because even if you do Drupal day in, day out, and you're trying to get a job at a Drupal shop or someone that's going to be using Drupal, the odds are you've probably created less than 100 Drupal sites. It's nice to have the big numbers with your modules. This is used by thousands of people, and you really didn't have to do any work. Don't tell them that part. And then the client or your project benefits because you get more eyes on the code. If I create a module that's very specific for the client, I don't release it, who's going to be doing the updates? Probably you or the client, depending on the client. But if you put it on Drupal.org, people are going to be submitting patches. Even those little modules that have 1 or 2 downloads. Believe it or not, people post patches like, hey, I needed it to do X, Y, and Z. Here's a patch that does this. You're like, great, I didn't even think about that. So it kind of takes on a life of its own when you put it on Drupal.org, and it continues. It just doesn't stagnate. Yeah, exactly. That's going to be coming up in just a minute about some of the other benefits. Now, you might be saying, we release modules. I guarantee it's a small fraction. I've done some surveys with various Drupal shops, and it's a fraction of 1% of all modules created actually get pushed up as a Contrib module. So think about it, if we could even just increase that to 1%, how many different Drupal modules would be out there that could help you? Because Drupal's great, you know how Apple says there's an app for that, Drupal, there's a module for that. When you actually run into the times that there's not a module for that, you're like, oh no, what am I gonna do? Well, you'd have to write it. If we increase this number even to 1%, it would have great coverage for the Drupal community and for people to be able to use it, and especially new users who are coming to it and certainly aren't going to be creating their own modules on their first Drupal site. So what about time on this? You know, does it take more time to put out a Contrib module? And it's kind of a yes and no question, or a yes and no answer. They're kind of a give and take. You are spending some time. You're probably going to write documentation. You're probably going to go ahead and make that admin panel instead of just hard coding it as some kind of variable for your client to use. That is going to take you a little bit more time. But in reality, the community is going to give back to you. They're going to give patches. They're going to give security reviews. They're going to test it. They might run it in some browser you never thought of running it and say, you know what, in Opera, this doesn't work. And then they'll give you a patch, well, hopefully. So it's kind of a give and take. So either way, you and your company and your project are benefiting, and the community as a whole is benefiting. So it's kind of a win-win situation for a pretty small investment of time. So let's talk about eating our own dog food. Ultimately, we want to save our fellow developers from recreating the wheel. And this is a nice one that we recently have. At MediaCurrent, we have someone that works on, I always forget if it's NodeWords or meta tag since they changed the name, it messes with me. But it's always nice to have an author of a popular module on staff so you can walk over to them and say, I'm having this problem with your module. Could you take a look at this? So it's kind of a nice thing to have people who have published modules out there. The last bullet on here should really just be the only bullet. Is you code to a higher standard when it's going to be publicly released. When your peers and the general public are going to see it and use it, you want to put your best code out there. So that's kind of one of the big ones out there. You want to improve your code, publish it. It's going to help you out greatly.
Not everybody gets that message, though.
Yeah.
There's a lot of litter on Drupal.org.
Yeah, that would be a little more scary. But since it's published out there, what's to stop someone from saying, you know what, I ran this through the coder module, I fixed these couple things, and here's a much cleaner version. It's even sometimes just good from an educational standpoint. You know, I'll be doing some code and it will be perfectly fine, but someone could come along and say, hey, did you know you could just use entity metadata query for this? I'm like, no, I did not know that. Okay, great. And so it kind of just helps you stay current along with it, and well, just the fear of your peers coming after you. So I'm going to be talking about 2 different types of modules here, and it's not like a type you would see on Drupal.org. But these 2 types of modules tend to make up over 99% of the modules you'll have on your site. So we have our glue module, and I hope everyone here is familiar with it, but it's a module that kind of sticks together 2 other Contrib modules. So it's just a little bit of code to pull some data over, or drop in an auto-completing field, or just create a form alter or something like that. That's generally your glue type module. They're usually quick and dirty. They're usually pretty project specific, so you don't really get to reuse them that often. And they're not a bad thing. I don't want to paint these as like, you should never create this. No, we all create them. but you probably don't want to release them because they're very client specific and they just glue together two modules. Although every once in a while you'll find a glue module that really helps you. How many people have ever used the WYSIWYG module? Have you ever used the IMCE to WYSIWYG bridge? Okay, a couple of you have. That's a glue module. It's fixing between the WYSIWYG module and the IMCE module so they actually work together properly. Now we also have our, our general Contrib module. Now this, and I use Contrib, it can kind of be a little bit looser than that. It exposes hooks for other modules to use, so it wants other modules to take advantage of it. It has a defined administrative and configuration section. It's reusable. I put one up here with a star. It has documentation. I'm guilty of this myself, but I hate going to a module, wanting to use it, and it not having documentation. Sure, we all learn at camps and all, this is how you use NodeQ. I'm just using NodeQ as an example. I don't know if it has documentation or not. But, if you ever need to go and look for something, it's really frustrating when the documentation isn't there, and you're like, I'm pretty sure it can do this, but it's not documented. You should always have documentation in there. And the last one is you should always follow your coding standards. Who here knows about the coder module? Have you ever used it? Okay, so the coder module kind of helps me. Even though I know the Drupal coding standards inside and out, I don't have much of a social life. The coder module really helps you with that. It's a module you can download, and then you can do a code review on your module that you created, or really any module, and it will tell you, you know what, you need a space here, or you have some code that might be insecure, or you should be using a different function call. This one's depreciated. So it has a lot of features in there that really help you create a clean module that will be easier to maintain in the future. So these are kind of all the main ones that I put as, this is what a Contrib module is. It's not a glue module, it's definitely a full module.
So back up, Andy.
Mm-hmm.
So on the first bullet, exposes hooks to other modules to use. Did the previous slide, does that imply that a glue module would take advantage of those hooks?
Yes, the glue modules primarily just use the hooks that are provided by other modules. Yeah. And you can have a glue module even in between your own modules, but they're usually taking something from module A and then putting something in module B or making a slight modification to module B.
Right. So I've seen modules that do that appear to be glue modules, but they actually bring functionality from different modules together.
Yes.
To make something greater.
Yeah, that happens a lot, and those are kind of in a gray area between Contrib and just pure glue module.
And then they get pulled into core in the next Drupal major release.
Yeah. It happens sometimes, and one glue module that I tend to create is for each project, I tend to just have a site-specific module for the really little things that don't warrant their own module. It might be a little form alt or a little hook on to modify something with login that are just really small, but it's specific for that project. So how do we actually go about, focusing on the Contrib first mindset and implementing it? So these are kind of the steps that I go through when looking through the client requirements to figure out where it fits. Is it a glue module? Is it a Contrib module? Does it already exist out there? So the first thing is you figure out how client-specific your requirements are. If they just have something like, we need a slideshow that's responsive, that's not very client-specific. But if they have the requirements that say, you know what, we need a slideshow that's responsive, that barks 3 times when they mouse over it and loads a very specific piece of information from a third-party web service, that might be a little more client-specific, so you might want to start paying attention to what they want there with that. The next step is find out if it already exists. And the next 2 bullets are kind of intertwined, finding out if it exists and can you hook into an existing module. Because for the barking example, there might already be a module out there that provides a slideshow for you that's responsive. Then you could just create a glue module to go in and add in the barking and the services that are needed. So at this point, you could either write your Contrib module or write your glue module to extend something that already exists. Now, the last step is a big one, is Drupal.org has a thing called sandboxes. And you can create any type of module you want up there. Anyone can do it. You could go do it right now. As long as you have a Drupal.org account, you can create a sandbox. They give you hosting for the project, a Git repo, and you can put your code out there. The nice thing is it's not a full project yet. So people can find it, but it gives them warnings. Like if you download this, it's a developer-only thing. You have to jump through some hoops to download it. But it's a nice way to get it out there, let other people review it, and kind of have a collaborative environment without saying, hey, this is a finished project and it's ready for everyone to start downloading. So you can actually just post it right on Drupal.org. And one of my developers a while back created a test module. We had it out there on Drupal.org, and we just did our normal downloads for it. It was really, really helpful to just basically put it out there as a Contrib module or a sandbox module and use that and try it out for our team. So it was really, really handy. So talking about client specific, how much of this module is only used by this client? Or can you split it out into a glue module? Do you really have to recreate the wheel? Now, does it really have to be client specific? That's kind of a big one. When was it? Drupal Camp ago, Mike and I created a module called Autocompletenator because one of my clients had a requirement that they had a member ID that could be typed into a field. But they wanted it to, when you started typing in a number or a name, for it to do an auto-completing dropdown. That's pretty easy to do in Drupal. We've probably all created one at certain times, and there's about a dozen modules out there that will do an autocomplete on your search box, an autocomplete on your user login. But they seem kind of fragmented, and the client's specific requirements didn't actually seem that client specific. They said, you know what, I want to show their username or their first name and their last name in the company they work for. I said, you know what, I can create a general module that will do an autocomplete on anything, on any text field. So by changing it from a client-specific item, I was actually able to make a Contrib module that was generic enough to satisfy both the client and the general Drupal population by being able to put an autocomplete on any field and make it dynamic by using views on the back end to populate. You could put anything you want in there, their favorite song if you had it as a field. So if you think more about, you know what, this is client-specific, but is there a general way I can solve their problem and actually answer their problem while still making it so other people can use it? That's a huge win. Another thing to think about, is it really client-specific or is it industry-specific? Your client might only make aglets for their shoe, and they might think they're the best company out there, but do they really need specific code, or let me rephrase that. Is their code really specific to the client, or could other companies that make aglets also use the code because it's industry specific? If you can answer that it is actually industry specific, that is a good candidate for releasing it again as a Contrib module, because there are probably other aglet companies out there that would really like to use a module that answers all their problems. Another thing that you have to check for, is it duplicate work? Is there already an existing module out there? If there's an existing module out there, use it. Don't recreate the wheel. Does the module actually provide hooks for you to use? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the module. And that's one of those things that I wish there was just a magic button that you could hit and say, will this work for me? No, you're actually going to have to dive through, hopefully, their documentation and their code to see if that's really going to work for you. Another one is, can your functionality help an existing module? If there's no module out there and it does 95% of what you need, why not write a patch for it that does the last 5% and submit that to the existing module so they can add it in? Remember at the beginning of the talk, I said a lot of times people will submit patches that you never thought about that functionality. This is a perfect example of, you know what? I wanted it to do this. It had almost everything I need. Here's a patch to do the last little bit. As a module maintainer, I'll tell you, we're all happy to get patches. Even if it's a totally crazy, bizarre patch that adds dancing bananas or something, we're always happy to get patches. It's way better than saying a support request saying, hey, can you add dancing bananas to your module? No, if someone gives me the patch for dancing bananas, I'd be much more happy than just a blank request. The last one is the sad story of the Drupal landscape. Has the module been abandoned? If it has, you can take it over. There is a process if there's an abandoned module and you can't reach the maintainer of it. With the Drupal.org webmasters, there's a page somewhere in Drupal.org that talks about it. But if it's actively maintained, you can speak to the maintainer and say, hey, I would like to take this over, or can I help you out with this? You don't even have to take it over. And a lot of times they'll give you access, and then you can start committing, and it becomes your project. I don't know, I've always been impressed when people are like, hey, here, you can become a maintainer on this module. I'm like, really? Okay. So don't be afraid to do that. They're usually pretty happy that people can take over or help out their project. Also, some projects you'll see at the bottom where it says the status, like there's actually an abandoned status. So if you see that, know that you're not going to get any support for your module unless you're willing to do it. So that's always a good one to find out if you should take it over. So, you know what? We didn't find a module that does what we need 100%. We didn't find one that was even close or had all the hooks we need, etc. So we need to write our own module. So the first thing you want to do is you don't want to have hard codes or limited, or you don't want to have hard codes, and you want to limit the number of constants you use. The reason that you don't want to have hard codes is, you know what? It makes sense for you to have 5 items on a page for your module. But you know what? Someone else might not want to have 5 items. They might want to have 50. They might want to have 10. So you could easily make that a variable that's configurable. And then you know what? You just open it up to a whole new batch of people that want to have different numbers of items on their page. The next part of that is you want to include your administrative or config page so people can actually change those variables that you've put in there. If they have to go into the code to change a constant from 5 to 50, that's not really that good. Most users aren't going to want to go into the code of a module. I know most Drupal users would probably run away screaming. Instead, you create an administrative page that they can go to, they can click, and it says number of items, and it's got a little selector there, and they can choose 50. You always want to add in hooks. Now, it's going to seem like you don't need them, but if you're putting it out there for general consumption, think of where you can add hooks that will add value for other people using the module. And this is one of the ones that becomes, at first, it's a little harder to grasp because you're not exactly sure where people are going to use. But that kind of actually leads into the next bullet. Your first release, your second release, your third release, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can put out new releases as much as you want. So as you find out there are new hooks or new items that you want to add to your module, you know what? You can just create another release. One of my favorite modules, the date module, it's been out for, I don't know, 7 years now. Is that about right, Mike? It's been out for ages. They put out a new release like every 2 weeks. It's about dates. While I know they can be complex, we haven't had a major calendar shift in a couple thousand years, I don't know. So, you know what? It doesn't have to be perfect. Be responsible, patch your bugs, upgrade your module, and you can just go on. Users are more than happy to deal with that. We all deal with that daily with our cell phones, Drupal sites, cable boxes, pretty much anything that uses software these days. I put in all caps because it's important. Use the coder module. It takes hardly any time, and it's like that annoying development manager that you have behind your back saying, you didn't put the right number of spaces in there. You didn't put the curly bracket in the right space. Just do it. It's super easy, and it makes you look awesomely smart. When people are like, this is a clean module, they don't have to know that the coder module said, you know what, you're doing this, this, and this wrong. And it even tells you how to fix it. So always use the coder module. And this is just a helpful tip. We use it on internal projects like glue modules even, because just the cleaner it is, it's easier to hand off to clients or different programmers later on. So always use the coder module.
What is that, Andrew? PHP style checker or something?
Well, it checks based on the Drupal coding standards. It's just a module you download. It goes through and it will check spacing, brackets, General syntax, yeah, and it'll even tell you, like, if you're using the old style DB query and instead of using the replacement patterns, you're concatenating strings, it'll warn you about doing that. It'll even warn you about, like, when you should use check plain and some other things. You can't entirely rely on it for security purposes, but it's a nice sanity check just to make sure you don't have glaring problems. So we've now created our module, we've run it through the coder module, we've done all those different things. We want to put this on Drupal.org. You do need to have special access to create full projects. Remember, sandboxes, as long as you have a Drupal.org account, you can create as many sandboxes as you want from day one. To have full projects, there is a review process. There is a web form that you have to fill out on Drupal.org, or technically it's a node. And then there's a group of people who actually go through and review your code that's in a sandbox and say, you know what, I think this person did their due diligence and this is a good module. It's not conflicting with anything else. It doesn't reproduce what another module does, and it doesn't have any glaring security errors. So then they'll give you access. Once you have access to create full projects, you can create as many as you want. So I only get requested access to create full projects, and now I could create 90 if I wanted to tomorrow. And just think of sandboxes as baby projects. You know, they'll eventually hopefully become a full-fledged project one day, but while you're working on it, or if it's a proof of concept, sandboxes are a great place to house them. Yeah, I think, and I applied before they had sandboxes, but I believe the new process, you have to have your code in the sandbox for them to check it out and review it.
Well, the first time. Once you
Yeah.
Once you have permission to do full projects, then you don't have to go through the sandbox.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, yeah, if you've never created a full project and you don't have that access, you have to have at least one in the sandbox for them to review and then grant you that access. But once you have access, you can either create a full project initially.
First module.
Yeah.
You've never done this, but after you are already a maintainer on a module, you don't ever have to go back to using the sandbox.
Correct. You can if you want to. I still use it for like experimental stuff, but and for free Git hosting. Drupal Association is going to hate me. So what is the cost of really doing a Contrib first module? They tend to go anywhere between 5 to 20% additional time of creating what would have been your hard-coded module for the client. And it's a pretty big gap between 5 to 20% because modules can be simple, they can be complex. It kind of gauges anywhere in between those based off of 4 years now of numbers that we've been able to digest. So there is an out-of-pocket cost if you're recording your time, and it's related to that. Oops, went too far. But also, think about it like this, you know, all the business owners and PMs in the room are saying 20%, oh, that's horrible. But think about it, if your module took you 40 hours to develop, it's a total of 48 hours if you were to go Contrib first and, you know, at 20%. So it's really not that much additional time considering.
So Andrew, where is the source repository of record for Trib modules? That is in Drupal, that is in the GitHub.
Well, you can have them anywhere, but if it's going to be a Drupal.org project, it's usually Drupal.org. You will see some projects that actually link out to GitHub or those types of things. Like Drush, I don't believe is the Git repo is actually hosted on Drupal.org anymore. But yeah, most of the time it is on Drupal.org.
So it can be anywhere, but if you're looking for a Contrib module, are you saying that they're not necessarily going to be on Drupal.org? No?
99.9% will be on Drupal.org. It's usually pretty odd for one not to be on Drupal.org.
Maybe advertised on Drupal.org, but it may point you to get the module from someplace else.
You can, but that's really the exception to the rule. Most of the time it's on Drupal.org and it'll stay there. Usually when they don't have it on Drupal.org, it's because of some technology limit with their Git hosting or some type of project preference. Yes, that was going to be my next one. If you're hosted on Drupal.org, it is GPL code. It will automatically put the GPL.txt in your code. So keep that in mind. If you're going to put it on Drupal.org, it is now GPL'd and subject to all the restrictions or benefits of the GPL 2, I think it is, on Drupal.org. You had a question back there?
There is one company that does responsive themes for Drupal. You go to their website, they do have Drupal modules on their site only. It's
Yeah.
the same as being on Drupal.org, but it's just they're hosting it. They don't put them out.
Yeah,
A
so
lot of them are very useful modules. I can't remember the name of them.
well, for the benefit of people at home, there are some companies out there that have Drupal modules and Drupal themes on their site. Some are free, some charge money. It's up to their preference. But most of the time when I'm looking for a module, I go to Drupal.org initially, and then I'll maybe branch out. But most of the time I'm looking at Drupal.org. So what's the end result of kind of going through, I think it was about 5 bullet points, steps of evaluating, you know what, should I use an existing module? Should I modify an existing module? Or should I create my own module? You really only have 2 outcomes out here. Either you saved your company time and money by reusing existing modules and hopefully committing them back, or you made yourself and your company more marketable by publishing a new module that helps out the community and your project and yourself. So really, it's kind of a win-win situation no matter which direction you go, as long as you publish it. So to recap, you have to figure out your requirements. What does your client really want? You have to search for, are there any existing modules that may completely do what you need or partially do what you need? Then you can create your own module. And absolutely, if you're doing Contrib first, you host it on Drupal.org or somewhere publicly accessible, depending on your reasons, to make it. It's, kind of boils down to these 4 bullet points. There is one caveat I do want to say, I don't have a slide for it, is if you are doing client work and you're going to publish it, please make sure that you have permission to do that if they're paying you for that time. Most clients are actually super happy. They're like, yes, that would be awesome to put that on Drupal.org. But I've had a couple clients be like, well, you don't necessarily want that to be posted out there. So always make sure either your contracts cover it or you have some type of conversation with them about sharing that code. Okay, and questions?
Where are some references for module building?
Okay, well, Drupal.org has the handbook about it, or a handbook about creating modules for all the different Drupal versions. That is, while it's cheaper, I would say isn't necessarily the most effective method. There are sites like buildamodule.com or Drupalize Me that have videos that walk you through step by step from simple to incredibly complex modules. And also there are training in events like this, usually the day before Drupal camps, Drupal cons, companies will provide training for a cost. Like yesterday, there was a Omega theme training from Media Current, and Drupal Easy does a lot of training before various events. So always keep an eye out for those, because they'll allow you to do deep dives quite often on subjects that the web generally doesn't do deep dives on. Yes? Where do you go about finding out how to build a module?
Lynda.com just finished one last week.
Okay, a new set of videos, or?
Came out last week. How to build a module for Drupal 7. It's if I remember right, about 3.5 hours long.
Okay, yeah, and lynda.com is always a good one. Yeah, how do you spell it? L-Y? Yeah, I knew it was fancy. Yeah, that was Drupalize Me.
Lullabot has a really good one where Jeff and WebChick are basically Skyping, and they're actually building a module right there as the video's going through. That one's really good.
Yeah, so there are a lot of good options out there. Some are free, some cost money, and always I always find it interesting that every once in a while I'll just find like a gem of a blog post and be like, that's how I do it. That's not covered in any of the sources. So Google is always your best friend.
Is there any way that you can go through step by step on how to actually get your module on Drupal.org?
Well, that would probably be a talk on its own, because that would be creating the project and/or sandbox and then going through Git and getting that on there. What I can do is, because right up here on the link, it will link you to this presentation. I'll add in a slide of key posts on Drupal.org on how to do that. So the question was, and I keep forgetting this for the video, was, you know what, is there a guide, or how would we go about putting a module on there on Drupal.org? Oh, and case does matter on that URL. Yes?
Do you ever find that you're building a module for a specific kind of use case, and as you're doing it, you think, well, this, if it were more generic, it would be useful, and do you ever think about that as you're building it, or do you always revisit later?
I try to actually think about that beforehand. So it's kind of, that's the Contrib first way, is think about it. Can I make it more generic and still use it for this client? Usually I find when, I'm halfway through and I realize I can make it more generic, the odds are that's not going to be released, because as much as I hate to admit it, I don't go back and release modules as much as I should. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'll leave this slide up, and feel free to get that URL, and my Twitter's on the bottom. Thank you, everyone.